Welcome to the world of daily life stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy listening. The turning point in the sky. The gentle hum of the airplane's engines was a soothing backdrop for the passengers on Flight 729, cruising at 35,000 feet. The cabin was filled with the quiet rustle of newspapers, the soft tapping of keyboards, and the occasional chatter of travelers. Among them was Dr. Amira Davies, a renowned pediatric surgeon who had spent her career saving lives. Exhausted from a grueling 72-hour shift, she reclined in her seat, hoping for a few hours of uninterrupted rest. Her peaceful respite was interrupted by the sharp voice of a flight attendant. "Excuse me, sir, but you're in the wrong seat," the attendant snapped, her tone far more abrasive than necessary. Dr. Davies looked up from her half-closed eyes to see the commotion 2 rows ahead. A young black man, dressed in a neat suit, was standing near the aisle, holding his boarding pass. His voice was calm but firm as he explained that this was, indeed, his seat. "I've been assigned this seat," he said, showing the attendant his ticket. The flight attendant crossed her arms, her face stern. "I'm going to need to verify this with the captain. You'll have to move until I sort this out." Dr. Davies felt a pang of discomfort. It wasn't the first time she had witnessed prejudice, and she could see this situation escalating quickly. The young man, though visibly frustrated, complied and moved to stand near the galley. A few passengers exchanged uneasy glances, but no one intervened. Dr. Davies took a deep breath. She had spent her life fighting for the voiceless, whether in the operating room or the courtroom. This moment, however small it seemed, felt like another battle worth fighting. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. "Excuse me," she said, her voice calm yet commanding. "What seems to be the issue here?" The flight attendant turned to her, her expression softening slightly. "It's just a misunderstanding. We'll sort it out." Dr. Davies raised an eyebrow. "A misunderstanding? This gentleman has shown you his ticket. Why is he being forced to move?" The attendant bristled. "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but this is a matter of protocol." "Protocol?" Dr. Davies' voice remained steady, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. "Your protocol seems to involve humiliating a paying customer based on assumptions. That doesn't sound like proper airline policy to me." By now, several passengers were watching the exchange. The young man, still standing in the galley, looked both surprised and grateful. The flight attendant, caught off guard by Dr. Davies' directness, hesitated before responding. "This has nothing to do with assumptions," she said defensively. "We're just ensuring everything is in order." "And while you ensure that," Dr. Davies said, "you're subjecting this man to unnecessary embarrassment. If there's an issue with his ticket, it should be handled with discretion and respect." The cabin grew quiet as the tension thickened. The flight attendant's face flushed, but before she could respond, a voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We seem to have a small misunderstanding regarding seating. Please bear with us for a moment." Dr. Davies took the opportunity to address the young man directly. "What's your name?" she asked. "Marcus," he replied, his voice steady despite the situation. "Marcus," she said, her tone warm yet resolute, "you've done nothing wrong. Stand your ground. If there's an issue, the burden is on them to prove it, not on you to defend yourself." The captain emerged from the cockpit a few moments later, his expression neutral, but his demeanor authoritative. After a brief discussion, he confirmed that Marcus was in the correct seat. The flight attendant, now visibly flustered, muttered an apology, but the damage was done. Marcus took his seat, and Dr. Davies returned to hers, but the energy in the cabin had shifted. Passengers murmured among themselves, some expressing solidarity with Marcus, others commending Dr. Davies for speaking up. The incident could have ended there, a small act of courage lost in the sea of everyday injustices. But fate had other plans. 7 minutes later, a panicked cry rang out from the back of the plane. "Help! Someone call a doctor!" Dr. Davies sprang to her feet, instincts honed by years of emergency surgeries taking over. She rushed toward the commotion and found a woman cradling a toddler who was gasping for air. The child's lips were turning blue, and his small chest heaved with effort. "What happened?" Dr. Davies asked, kneeling beside them. He was fine, and then he just started choking," the mother sobbed, tears streaming down her face. Dr. Davies quickly assessed the situation. The child was in severe respiratory distress, and she suspected an allergic reaction. "I need an EpiPen or a first aid kit, now," she called out. The flight attendant who had argued with Marcus moments earlier appeared with the kit, her hands trembling. Dr. Davies didn't waste time. She administered the epinephrine and instructed the mother to hold the child upright while she monitored his breathing. Slowly, the child's breathing stabilized and his color returned. The cabin erupted into applause, but Dr. Davies was focused solely on the little boy, ensuring he was out of danger. When the situation was under control, the captain called her to the cockpit. "Dr. Davies," he said, his voice filled with gratitude, "your quick thinking may have saved that child's life. On behalf of the crew and passengers, thank you." Dr. Davies nodded, her mind still racing. "We need to ensure he's examined by paramedics as soon as we land." The captain assured her that arrangements were already being made. As the plane descended toward its destination, the atmosphere in the cabin was markedly different. Passengers who had witnessed the earlier confrontation now looked at Dr. Davies with admiration and respect. Marcus, too, approached her. "Thank you," he said simply. "For standing up for me earlier and for what you just did." Dr. Davies smiled. "No need to thank me. We're all human. It's the least I could do." The flight attendant, still visibly shaken, approached her as well. "Dr. Davies, I owe you an apology for both incidents. I acted inappropriately, and I deeply regret it." Dr. Davies met her gaze. "Acknowledging it is the first step. What matters is what you do moving forward." As the plane touched down, Dr. Davies couldn't help but feel that this flight, with its challenges and triumphs, was more than just a journey from one city to another. It was a reminder of the power of courage, compassion, and the ability to transform even the smallest moments into something meaningful. Dr. Amira Davies disembarked from the plane, her mind still buzzing with the events of the flight. The young boy she'd saved had been whisked away by paramedics, his mother's tearful gratitude echoing in her ears. As Amira made her way through the terminal, she noticed Marcus walking a few steps ahead. Their earlier encounter had left an impression on her, and she quickened her pace to catch up. "Marcus," she called softly, not wanting to startle him. He turned, his face lighting up in recognition. "Dr. Davies," he greeted warmly, extending his hand. "I wanted to thank you again. Not just for speaking up for me, but for how you handled everything. You were incredible." Amira smiled modestly, shaking his hand. "It was the right thing to do. You shouldn't have been treated that way." Marcus nodded, his expression turning thoughtful. "It's something I've gotten used to, unfortunately. But seeing someone like you, someone who didn't have to stand up for me, that meant a lot." They walked together through the bustling terminal, their conversation flowing easily. Amira learned that Marcus was an attorney specializing in civil rights cases, and he had just returned from a conference where he'd been a keynote speaker. The irony of his situation on the flight wasn't lost on him. "You know," he said, pausing by a coffee kiosk, "the way you handled that flight attendant, it was a masterclass in grace under pressure. I couldn't help but think how much good you could do beyond the operating room." Amira tilted her head, intrigued. "What do you mean?" Marcus hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "You have a presence, Dr. Davies. People listen to you. You're not just a healer, you're a leader. Have you ever considered using your voice to advocate for change on a larger scale?" The question lingered in the air between them. Amira had spent her entire career fighting for the most vulnerable, tiny hearts beating against impossible odds. Yet, Marcus's words struck a chord. She'd always believed her work was confined to the hospital, but what if she could do more? What if her voice could save lives in ways she hadn't yet imagined? They exchanged contact information before parting ways, Marcus offering to introduce her to a network of activists and changemakers. As Amira watched him disappear into the crowd, she felt the stirrings of something new, a sense of purpose that extended beyond the walls of her hospital. Back at the hospital, Amira returned to the controlled chaos of her life as a pediatric surgeon. The days blurred into nights as she performed one intricate surgery after another. Yet, the events of the flight lingered in her mind, resurfacing during quiet moments in the operating room or late at night when she stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Her colleagues noticed the change in her. Dr. Raj Patel, her closest friend and confidant, cornered her in the break room one afternoon. "You've been distracted," he said, handing her a cup of coffee. "What's going on?" Amira hesitated, unsure how to articulate the thoughts swirling in her mind. "Do you ever feel like we could be doing more? Like the work we do here is just one piece of the puzzle?" Raj raised an eyebrow. "You save lives, Amira. That's more than most people can say. What more could you want?" She sighed, swirling the coffee in her cup. "I don't know. I just keep thinking about this flight I was on. There was this man, Marcus, and this incident with a flight attendant. It made me realize how much injustice exists outside these walls. And then there was the little boy. What if I could do something to make a bigger impact? Beyond surgeries, I mean." Raj leaned back, studying her. "You've always been the type to take on the world, one way or another. If anyone can figure out how to balance saving lives in here with changing lives out there, it's you." His words stayed with her. Over the next few weeks, Amira began exploring opportunities to merge her medical expertise with advocacy work. True to his word, Marcus introduced her to a network of activists, community leaders, and organizations fighting for systemic change. She attended meetings and workshops, learning about the intersection of healthcare and social justice. One evening, Marcus invited her to speak at a panel discussion on equitable access to healthcare. Amira was hesitant at first. Public speaking wasn't her forte, but Marcus convinced her that her voice was needed. The panel was held in a community center, the room packed with people from all walks of life. As Amira took the stage, she felt a familiar surge of nerves, similar to the moments before a critical surgery. She began by sharing her story, recounting the events of the flight and her experiences as a pediatric surgeon. "Every day, I fight for children who can't fight for themselves," she said, her voice steady and clear. "But what happens to those children when they leave my care? What happens to the families who can't afford the medication or follow-up treatments? These are questions we need to answer, not just as doctors, but as a society." The audience erupted in applause, their energy fueling her confidence. Over the next hour, she fielded questions, shared ideas, and connected with people who were as passionate about change as she was. After the panel, a woman approached her, holding the hand of a young boy who couldn't have been older than 6. His wide eyes and shy smile reminded Amira of the child she'd saved on the flight. "Dr. Davies," the woman said, her voice trembling, "thank you for speaking up. My son was born with a congenital heart defect, and if it weren't for people like you, he wouldn't be here today." Amira knelt to the boy's level, her heart swelling with emotion. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Eli," he said softly. "Well, Eli," she said, ruffling his hair, "you've got a strong heart, and I have no doubt you're going to do amazing things." The encounter solidified her resolve. Amira realized that her journey as a healer wasn't confined to the operating room. It extended to every person she met, every story she heard, and every system she could help change. Months later, Amira found herself at the forefront of a movement she hadn't planned to lead. She collaborated with Marcus to launch an initiative aimed at addressing disparities in healthcare access. They worked tirelessly, hosting workshops, lobbying policymakers, and raising funds for underserved communities. The airline from that fateful flight even reached out, inviting Amira to speak at their corporate headquarters about diversity training and customer service. She accepted, viewing it as an opportunity to turn a negative experience into a positive change. Standing before a room of airline executives, she recounted the events of the flight, not to shame them, but to emphasize the importance of empathy and accountability. Every interaction we have, she said, is an opportunity to make someone feel valued or dismissed. It's up to us to decide which impact we want to leave. Her words resonated, sparking a company-wide overhaul of training programs and policies. The flight attendant who had caused the initial conflict reached out to Amira privately, sharing how the experience had prompted her to confront her own biases and grow as a person. Amira's advocacy work began attracting attention on a national scale. Media outlets featured her story, dubbing her the doctor with a mission. Despite the growing spotlight, she remained grounded, continuing her work at the hospital while balancing her new role as a changemaker. One evening, after a particularly long day, she received a message from Marcus. "Turn on the news," it read. She did, and to her astonishment, she saw a segment about their initiative. The anchor spoke of the lives they'd touched, the policies they'd influenced, and the hope they'd inspired. Amira sat back, her eyes welling with tears. It wasn't about recognition, it was about knowing that they were making a difference. As she turned off the television, her phone buzzed with another message, this time from Raj. "Changing the world, one heart at a time," it read, accompanied by a thumbs-up emoji. Amira smiled, her heart full. The journey had been unexpected, challenging, and at times overwhelming. But as she reflected on the path that had brought her here, from the operating room to the skies, and now to the broader stage of social change, she felt an unwavering sense of purpose. She wasn't just a surgeon or an advocate. She was a force for good, driven by the belief that every life mattered and that even the smallest acts of courage could transform the world. And she knew, with every fiber of her being, that this was only the beginning. Amira Davies's days became a whirlwind of surgeries, advocacy meetings, and speaking engagements. The movement she had inadvertently started was growing faster than she could have imagined, fueled by the enthusiasm of those who believed in her message of equality and compassion. Her partnership with Marcus had blossomed into a formidable alliance, with his legal expertise complementing her medical knowledge. Together, they became a beacon for those fighting for justice in healthcare and beyond. One afternoon, Amira was sitting in her office at the hospital, reviewing patient files between surgeries. Her desk was cluttered with medical journals, advocacy pamphlets, and sticky notes with hastily scribbled reminders. As she reached for her coffee, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Marcus. "Urgent meeting tonight. Can you make it? Something big is brewing." Amira sighed. She had planned to spend her evening reviewing a particularly complex case for a surgery scheduled the next day, but Marcus's message sounded serious. She quickly replied, "I'll be there," and returned to her work, though her mind was already racing with curiosity. That evening, she arrived at a small community center in a part of town she hadn't visited before. The room was packed, the air buzzing with a mixture of tension and determination. Marcus stood near the front, deep in conversation with a group of people who looked like they had seen more than their fair share of struggles. As Amira approached, Marcus noticed her and waved her over. "Amira, glad you could make it," he said, his tone more serious than usual. "I want you to meet some folks who've been directly impacted by the issues we're fighting." He introduced her to a nurse named Clara, who had lost her job after speaking out against unsafe conditions in her hospital, and a man named Reggie, whose young daughter had died because their insurance refused to cover a life-saving surgery. Their stories were gut-wrenching, each one a stark reminder of the systemic failures Amira had committed herself to addressing. "Clara and Reggie are just two examples," Marcus said after the introductions. "There are thousands like them, and they're counting on us to make a difference. But we've hit a roadblock. We need someone with your credibility and reach to help us take this fight to the next level." Amira listened intently, her heart heavy with the weight of their stories. She had always believed in the power of small, incremental changes, but this moment felt different. The urgency in Marcus's voice and the pain in Clara and Reggie's eyes made it clear that this was a battle that couldn't wait. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice steady, despite the storm of emotion swirling within her. Marcus smiled, a flicker of hope breaking through his serious demeanor. "We're organizing a rally at the state capitol next month. It's going to be big, but we need a strong voice to lead the charge. Someone who can speak from the heart and inspire people to act." Amira hesitated. Public speaking still wasn't her strong suit, and the idea of standing before thousands of people filled her with a familiar sense of anxiety. But as she looked around the room, at the faces of people who had suffered and fought and refused to give up, she knew she couldn't say no. "I'll do it," she said, her resolve firm. "Whatever it takes." The weeks leading up to the rally were a blur of planning, preparation, and practice. Amira worked closely with Marcus and a team of volunteers to craft a speech that would resonate with the crowd. She spent her evenings rehearsing in front of a mirror, her words gaining confidence and conviction with each passing day. The day of the rally arrived, and the atmosphere was electric. The steps of the state capitol were filled with people holding signs and chanting slogans, their voices rising in a unified cry for change. Amira stood backstage, her heart pounding as she listened to the speeches that came before hers. "Ready?" Marcus asked, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. She nodded, taking a deep breath to steady herself. As her name was announced, the crowd erupted into applause, their cheers a mixture of hope and expectation. Amira stepped up to the podium, the bright sun and sea of faces momentarily overwhelming her. She began her speech with a story, recounting her journey as a surgeon and the moments that had shaped her path toward advocacy. She spoke of the flight that had changed everything, of the little boy whose life she had saved, and of the systemic failures that had inspired her to fight for something greater. "Our healthcare system is broken," she said, her voice rising with emotion. "It's a system that values profits over people, that turns a blind eye to those who need help the most. But it doesn't have to be this way. Together, we have the power to demand better, for ourselves, for our families, and for future generations." The crowd erupted into cheers, their energy fueling her confidence. She continued, weaving together facts, personal anecdotes, and a call to action that left no room for apathy. By the time she finished, the crowd was on its feet, their applause thunderous. Amira stepped away from the podium, her heart racing with a mixture of relief and exhilaration. Marcus met her backstage, his face alight with pride. "You were incredible," he said, pulling her into a quick hug. "That's exactly what we needed." The rally was a turning point, not just for the movement but for Amira herself. In the weeks that followed, their cause gained national attention. Politicians began reaching out, offering to support their efforts. Media outlets covered their stories, shining a spotlight on the issues they were fighting to address. But with the attention came challenges. Opponents of their cause began to push back, accusing them of being too radical or unrealistic. Amira found herself the target of online harassment, her inbox flooded with hateful messages and threats. It was a side of advocacy she hadn't anticipated, and it weighed heavily on her. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, she called Raj. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," she admitted, her voice trembling. "It's like no matter how much good we do, there's always someone trying to tear us down." Raj listened patiently before responding. "Amira, you're not in this fight because it's easy. You're in it because it's necessary. And if anyone can handle the pressure, it's you. Don't let the negativity drown out the voices of the people you're helping." His words gave her the strength to keep going. She threw herself back into her work, determined to stay focused on the mission. The movement continued to grow, its impact spreading far beyond what she had initially envisioned. One day, as she was walking through the hospital, a nurse stopped her in the hallway. "Dr. Davies," she said, her voice filled with emotion, "I just wanted to thank you. My nephew was able to get the treatment he needed because of the changes you've helped bring about. You're making a real difference." Amira smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. It was moments like these that reminded her why she had chosen this path, despite the challenges. She wasn't just fighting for change, she was seeing it happen, one life at a time. As she returned to her office, she thought about how far she had come since that fateful flight. What had started as a single act of courage had blossomed into a movement that was transforming lives and reshaping systems. And while the journey was far from over, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. Amira Davies stood in the center of her bustling office, papers and charts spread across every surface. The sunlight filtering through the blinds highlighted the faint dark circles under her eyes, an unmistakable sign of exhaustion that had become her constant companion. Between her duties as a surgeon and her growing role as an activist, every moment of her life was spoken for. Yet, despite the toll it took, she felt alive, driven by a purpose greater than herself. Her phone buzzed on the desk, breaking her focus. She glanced at the screen and saw Marcus's name flashing. Picking up, she heard the urgency in his voice before he even spoke. "We've got a situation," he began without preamble. "One of the key hospitals in our advocacy network just had their funding pulled. They're claiming budget constraints, but I'm hearing whispers that it's retaliation for supporting our cause." Amira felt a familiar surge of anger. The hospital in question, St. Mary's Community, was a critical facility serving an underserved population. Without adequate funding, countless patients would be left without care. "What do we need to do?" she asked, already reaching for her laptop. "We need to mobilize," Marcus replied. "There's a town hall tomorrow night. I need you there to speak." This is one of those moments where we either push back hard or risk losing ground. Amira sighed. She had back-to-back surgeries scheduled for the next day, but she knew there was no question of her attendance. "I'll be there," she said firmly. The next day was grueling. She performed 3 surgeries, each one more complex than the last. By the time she scrubbed out of the final case, her muscles ached, and her mind was clouded with fatigue. But there was no time to rest. She changed into a fresh set of clothes and headed straight to the community center where the town hall was being held. The room was packed when she arrived, the air thick with tension and frustration. Community members, hospital staff, and patients filled the seats, their faces reflecting a mixture of worry and determination. Marcus met her at the door, his expression a blend of relief and urgency. "Glad you made it," he said, ushering her toward the front. "They're fired up, but they need direction." "That's where you come in." Amira nodded, taking a moment to center herself before stepping onto the small stage. The murmurs in the room quieted as she approached the microphone, all eyes fixed on her. "Good evening," she began, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "I know many of you are scared. You're angry. And you have every right to be. What's happening to St. Mary's isn't just an attack on a hospital, it's an attack on this community. On every person who relies on this facility for care." The crowd responded with murmurs of agreement, their energy palpable. Amira continued, weaving together statistics, personal stories, and a call to action that left no room for apathy. "But let me be clear," she said, her voice rising. "We are not powerless. We have a voice, and we have each other. And together, we will fight for what's right. For our hospital. For our community. For every life that depends on it." The room erupted into applause, the noise reverberating off the walls. Amira stepped back, letting the momentum of her words carry the energy forward. Marcus took the stage next, outlining specific steps the community could take, petitions, rallies, and direct appeals to elected officials. As the meeting wrapped up, Amira stayed behind to speak with attendees. A young woman approached her, holding the hand of a small boy who looked no older than 5. His cheeks were flushed, and he clutched a stuffed animal tightly. "Dr. Davies," the woman began, her voice trembling. "I just wanted to thank you. My son, Malik, was born premature, and St. Mary's saved his life. I don't know what we'd do without this hospital." Amira knelt to Malik's level, her heart swelling with emotion. "Malik, you've got a lot of people fighting for you. We're going to make sure your hospital is here for you whenever you need it." The boy gave her a shy smile, and his mother wiped away tears. Moments like these fueled Amira's resolve, reminding her why she had taken on this fight in the first place. Over the next few weeks, the campaign to save St. Mary's gained momentum. Petitions gathered thousands of signatures, rallies drew massive crowds, and media coverage put pressure on local officials. Amira became a central figure in the movement, her speeches and interviews amplifying the voices of those who had long been ignored. But the fight was far from easy. Opponents of the campaign launched smear efforts, accusing Amira and Marcus of using the hospital crisis for personal gain. The attacks were vicious, targeting everything from Amira's credibility as a surgeon to her personal life. One night, as she sat in her office reviewing patient charts, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was an article accusing her of neglecting her duties at the hospital in favor of activism. The claims were baseless, but the comments section was filled with vitriol. She closed the browser, her hands trembling. For the first time, she felt the weight of doubt creeping in. Was she spreading herself too thin? Was she truly making a difference, or was she just a target for criticism? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. Raj poked his head in, his expression concerned. "You okay?" he asked, stepping inside. Amira hesitated before nodding. "Just tired. This fight is bigger than I ever imagined, and sometimes I wonder if I'm the right person to lead it." Raj pulled up a chair, his tone gentle but firm. "Amira, you've always been the right person. You've got the skills, the passion, and the heart. And yeah, it's hard. But that's what makes it worth it. You're not just saving lives in the OR anymore, you're changing lives on a massive scale." His words brought a flicker of reassurance, and Amira felt a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't in this fight alone, and she owed it to those who believed in her to keep pushing forward. A few days later, the campaign scored a major victory. Local officials announced that they would restore funding to St. Mary's, ensuring the hospital could continue serving the community. The news was met with celebrations, and Amira found herself at the center of the jubilant crowd. As she looked around at the faces of those who had fought alongside her, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. This victory wasn't hers alone, it belonged to everyone who had refused to give up, who had stood together in the face of adversity. But even as she celebrated, Amira knew the fight was far from over. St. Mary's was just one battle in a much larger war for justice and equality. There were countless other communities, other hospitals, and other lives that needed saving. As the sun set on the celebratory gathering, Marcus approached her, his expression a mix of pride and determination. "You did it," he said simply. "We did it," Amira corrected, her smile genuine. "But this is just the beginning." Marcus nodded, his eyes reflecting the same fire that burned within her. "Then let's get to work." Months passed, and the movement that Amira Davies and Marcus had built grew into a national force. What had started as a local campaign to save one hospital had blossomed into a full-fledged advocacy network called Heal Together, focused on addressing systemic inequalities in healthcare. The organization worked across state lines, bringing resources to underserved communities, lobbying for legislative reforms, and empowering everyday people to fight for their right to healthcare. Amira found herself busier than ever. Her days were still spent in the operating room, repairing fragile hearts and comforting anxious families. Her nights, however, were a different battlefield. She juggled interviews with journalists, strategy meetings with policymakers, and brainstorming sessions with Marcus and their growing team. The dual roles often felt impossible to balance, but Amira's resolve never wavered. Each child she saved in the OR and each family she met in the field fueled her belief in the mission they were building. One rainy afternoon, as Amira sat at her desk between surgeries, her assistant, Naomi, knocked and entered with a folder in hand. "You're going to want to see this," Naomi said, placing the folder on Amira's desk. Inside were documents detailing a proposed piece of legislation that had the potential to revolutionize healthcare access for low-income families. The bill, unofficially called the Health Equity Act, aimed to increase funding for community hospitals, cap out-of-pocket expenses for patients, and mandate implicit bias training for healthcare providers. It was bold, ambitious, and exactly the kind of change Amira had been fighting for. "This is incredible," Amira said, flipping through the pages. Who's sponsoring it? Naomi hesitated. That's the thing. It doesn't have a sponsor yet. It's been drafted by a coalition of advocacy groups, but it needs someone to champion it in Congress. They're asking if you'll help rally support. Amira leaned back in her chair, the weight of the request settling on her shoulders. Rallying support for such a transformative bill would mean stepping even further into the spotlight. It would mean more public scrutiny, more attacks, and even less time for her surgical practice. But it could also mean changing millions of lives. Schedule a call with the coalition, she said after a moment. Let's see what they need. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of meetings and strategy sessions. Amira and Marcus worked tirelessly to build a coalition of supporters, from grassroots activists to prominent lawmakers. They organized town halls, launched social media campaigns, and met with community leaders across the country. The momentum was undeniable, but so were the challenges. Opponents of the bill came out in full force, backed by powerful lobbying groups with deep pockets. They flooded the airwaves with ads, claiming the bill was too costly and impractical, painting Amira and her team as idealists out of touch with reality. The attacks became personal, with pundits questioning Amira's credibility as a surgeon and even targeting her private life. One particularly harsh article accused her of neglecting her patients in favor of political ambitions. The headline stung, and though Amira tried to brush it off, the accusations found their way into her thoughts during quiet moments. Late one night, as she sat in her living room surrounded by stacks of papers, Marcus called. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Amira sighed. "I'm fine. Just tired. They're throwing everything they've got at us, and some days it feels like we're barely holding on." "You're not alone in this," Marcus reminded her. "We've got an army of people behind us. And more importantly, you've got me. Don't forget that." His words brought a small smile to her face. Marcus had been her anchor throughout this journey, his unwavering belief in their mission keeping her grounded during the toughest moments. "Thanks, Marcus," she said softly. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "You'll never have to find out," he replied, his tone both reassuring and resolute. "Now get some rest. We've got a big week ahead." The following week brought a pivotal moment in their campaign. Amira and Marcus had secured a meeting with Senator Evelyn Torres, a highly respected lawmaker known for championing social justice causes. If they could convince her to sponsor the bill, it would be a game-changer. The meeting took place in the senator's Washington, D.C., office. Amira wore her favorite navy blazer, her nerves hidden behind a mask of calm professionalism. Marcus sat beside her, his presence a silent reminder that she wasn't facing this battle alone. Senator Torres listened intently as Amira outlined the goals of the Health Equity Act, her passion evident in every word. She shared stories of patients she'd treated, families she'd met, and the systemic failures she'd witnessed firsthand. "Senator," Amira concluded, "this isn't just about policy. It's about people. It's about ensuring that no parent has to choose between paying for their child's medication and keeping the lights on. It's about giving every person, regardless of their income or zip code, the chance to live a healthy life." The room fell silent as Senator Torres considered her words. Finally, she leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "Dr. Davies," she said, "you've made a compelling case. I won't lie, this bill faces an uphill battle. But I believe in what you're fighting for, and I want to help. You have my support." Relief and gratitude washed over Amira as she shook the senator's hand. It was a monumental step forward, but she knew the real fight was just beginning. Over the next several months, the campaign to pass the Health Equity Act reached a fever pitch. Amira and Marcus crisscrossed the country, rallying support and meeting with lawmakers. The media coverage intensified, with Amira becoming a symbol of hope for some and a lightning rod for criticism from others. The pressure was relentless, but the victories kept her going. One by one, they secured endorsements from influential figures, including healthcare organizations, civil rights groups, and even a few high-profile celebrities. The movement became impossible to ignore, forcing even its fiercest critics to engage with the issues it raised. Finally, the day came when the bill was brought to the floor of the Senate for a vote. Amira and Marcus watched from the gallery, their hands clenched in anticipation as the roll call began. Each "I" sent a surge of hope through the room, while each "nay" was a painful reminder of the obstacles they'd faced. When the final vote was announced, the chamber erupted into applause. The Health Equity Act had passed by a narrow margin, its victory a testament to the tireless efforts of everyone who had fought for it. Amira sat back in her seat, tears streaming down her face as the reality of what they had accomplished sank in. Marcus squeezed her hand, his own eyes glistening with emotion. "We did it," he whispered. "No," Amira corrected, her voice filled with pride. "We all did it." In the weeks that followed, Amira returned to her life as a surgeon, her days once again filled with the delicate work of mending tiny hearts. But her nights were no longer consumed by doubt. The passage of the Health Equity Act had proven that change was possible, and though the fight for justice was far from over, she knew they had taken a monumental step forward. As she stood in the OR one afternoon, preparing for another surgery, her phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. "This is just the beginning," it read. "Ready for what's next?" Amira smiled beneath her surgical mask, her heart swelling with a familiar sense of purpose. She typed a simple reply before turning her focus back to her patient. "Always."